The queen of country music, Tammy Wynette, dies suddenly at the age of 55.
I will always believe that her death was not an accident.
The surprise is not that Tammy died. The surprise is that she lived.
After a lifetime of anguish, she's betrayed once again in death.
We went there to expect to hear exactly what Mom had told us, and it was not at all what Mom had told us.
Leaving her children to wonder why the First Lady of Heartache continued to stand by her man.
Something was not right, and we had to know what the answers were.
Her will, God played out exactly how she would have wished after what they did to her.
On April 6, 1998, country music star Tammy Wynette is found dead inside her Tennessee mansion. Tammy's friend and former hairdresser, Nanette Nichols Crafton, is phoned with the news.
Well, they called me and said Tammy's died. And I went over to the house, and it was so sad that she was just laying there dead on the sofa.
Tammy's youngest daughter, Georgette Jones, learns of the tragedy in the worst possible way.
The day my mother passed away, April 6, 1998, I was working as a registered nurse at a local hospital in Alexander City. One of the nurses came and said, "You need to call home." And I said, "Oh my, what's wrong with my children? Are my children okay?" It's my first thought. She then told me that another nurse friend of mine had seen on TV that my mom had passed away. And I think that I went numb.
Tammy's children are devastated by her death.
Still very emotional, still very raw. For a long time, I couldn't listen to her music. I could not watch anything that she was on.
It hasn't always been easy having such a famous mother.
She had her differences with her daughters, don't get me wrong. There were times where she wasn't talking to one or the other.
She was gone for certain pivotal things in our lives, and I know it bothered her. At the end of the day, she truly loved her family. She took care of us, and we never wanted for anything.
The relationship Tammy had with her own mother was not easy. On May 5, 1942, Virginia Wynette Pugh, or Tammy Wynette as she was later to be known, is born to a family of cotton farmers near Tremont, Mississippi. The happy household doesn't last long.
Tammy's father died when Tammy was just an infant, which had a big effect on Tammy. I think the cliche of looking for a father figure definitely applied to Tammy throughout her life.
As a teenager, Tammy and her mother Mildred's personalities clash.
She was a rebellious child. I think my grandmother probably had a lot of problems with her, but I think a lot of that was due to her creativity, because she was wanting, even at an early age, to start her singing career.
Mildred was very bullheaded, and so was Tammy. There was no way anybody was going to tell Tammy what to do, even at that age. And that set up a whole dynamic that I think lasted her whole life.
At 17, Tammy begins dating 22-year-old Upal Bird. One night after arriving home late from a date, her mother hits her in the face with a belt, hard enough to draw blood.
Upal was older, and it just drove Mildred crazy that Tammy was out with him, came home late for dates, and after one particular date, I guess she got a walloping, and she just said, "That's it."
Even though she is only 1 month away from finishing high school, Tammy decides that the only way to escape her overbearing mother is to marry Upal.
She just needed to get out of there, and getting married was the way she could do it.
Tammy and Upal have 3 children together, Gwen, Jackie, and Tina, but the relationship falls apart.
Marrying Upal did not make her free, to say the least. They had a lot of fights.
By 1966, after 7 years of marriage, Tammy takes her 3 daughters and moves to Nashville. She dreams of becoming a star.
Tammy was independent. She was going to do, as I say, what Tammy wanted to do.
After knocking on door after door in Nashville, Tammy eventually lands a lucky break.
She finally went to CBS Records, where that day the receptionist had taken a lunch break, and she just walked in with her guitar, walked right into his office and said, "Hi, I'm Virginia Wynette Pugh, and I want a record deal."
She looked like somebody at the end of their rope, is how I think he put it. And she came in and pitched him some songs, and he heard nothing, but something in the back of his mind said, "Don't turn this chick down."
She signs a record deal with producer Billy Sherrill, and he changes her name to Tammy Wynette. Her first single, Apartment Number 9, peaks at number 44 on the country music charts.
All of her peers heard that song. They all told me, Loretta, Dolly, George Jones, when we heard that song, there was somebody there to be reckoned with.
2 years later, in 1968, she and Sherrill write the song she will forever be known for.
If there's a song that is classic Tammy, for better and for worse, it is Stand By Your Man. And it really came about by accident.
Tammy showed up at the recording studio. She recorded 2 songs, and Billy had hired the musicians for another hour. And he said to Tammy, he says, let's go upstairs to my office and write a song. They went up to his office, and 20 minutes later, they came back down with Stand By Your Man, which went on to be the biggest selling single in country music history.
By 1970, a mere 4 years after signing her first record deal, she's already won 2 Grammys and 3 CMA awards. She will continue to rule the country charts for the next decade.
Well, Tammy was the very best. She was the first lady of country music for a reason. She was the first female artist to sell over 1 million records, and that's when they called her the First Lady.
Tammy's personal life, however, is not so rosy. By the time she's 34 years old, she has 3 ex-husbands, Upal Bird, musician Don Chappell, and country legend George Jones, the father of her 4th daughter, Georgette.
Tammy loved being in love. She always was looking for the ultimate love. She had to have a man.
In the summer of 1976, she decides to try her luck again with real estate developer Michael Tomlin. The marriage is a disaster, and she has it annulled after just 44 days. With 4 failed marriages, Tammy decides that the next one has to be for keeps.
She was like, my fans won't stand for another divorce. And we go, oh, yeah, they will, man. They love it when you get divorced. New songs, new hits. Come on, your fans love it.
Her friend George Ritchie has been providing a shoulder for her to cry on through her many breakups. Their relationship develops into a romantic one, and in 1978 she finds herself saying "I do" for the 5th time.
I do remember the day Mom came to us and said, Richie, she called him Richie and I are getting married. And I think for me, it was, I so wanted Mom to be happy. So if Richie made her happy, then I was all for it.
Richie will change Tammy's life, some say for better, and others for much, much worse.
You could just feel that he wasn't right.
Country music star Tammy Wynette believes she has finally found a man to stand by in husband number 5. But is Richie really the knight in shining armor that she thinks he is? George Ritchie, born Richardson, has been a friend of Tammy's for years. A songwriter and producer himself, Ritchie's worked with some of country's greatest like Merle Haggard and Johnny Horton.
George Ritchie, who's a very well-respected person here in the Nashville music industry and very accomplished as a musician and a producer and songwriter in his own right.
He and Tammy were definitely friends. At some point in here, Richie confesses to Tammy that he is in love with her and always has been.
Unlike Tammy's other marriages, this one sticks. She will stay with Richie until her untimely death 20 years later. Sheila Slaughter Ritchie marries Richie 3 years after Tammy passes away.
Tammy and Richie had an extraordinary relationship. It was inspiring, actually. The love that they shared was remarkable. If Tammy was not happy in her marriage, trust me, she would have made sure that she found her way out. No one could have made her stay in that.
Mom spoke in public about how she loved him and he loved her, and so it appeared to be that she finally found that knight in shining armor she always looked for.
Some of Tammy's friends and family, however, saw a darker side.
George Ritchie was one of the most controlling people that I've ever known anything about. You could just feel that he wasn't right. He controlled when Tammy saw who and for how long, and I tried to stay on his good side all the time because he had gotten rid of Jan, he had gotten rid of Nan, he had ostracized her from Gwen, he had pretty much eliminated all of her close friends.
Tammy's daughters and friends say that she even tried to leave Richie.
I lived just right around the corner from her, and I drove up, actually, and she was sitting on her suitcases in my driveway. She came inside, and she said, I'm going to leave him, and I was ecstatic. I said, okay, you can stay here. And then as she stayed, I think she got frightened because I remember her telling me many, many times that he would always tell her, you're nothing without me.
Those close to Tammy actually insist that her heart belonged to another. Her third husband, George Jones. They were married for 6 years before they split.
I believe, after talking to so many people in Tammy's life, George Jones was the love of her life, remained so till her dying day. She just couldn't live with him.
During her marriage to Richie, Tammy's health rapidly declines. Plagued with intestinal problems from an early age, she goes under the knife many times throughout her life.
Tammy had 32 or 33 stomach surgeries, one of which, I think maybe the second last of which, she was in surgery for something like 12 hours, and she had, I think, 8 or 9 inches of scar tissue that they had to cut through to get to the problem.
While only in her mid-50s, she appears aged and frail. After being estranged from Tammy for a period of time, friend Janine Nichols Smith is surprised by her altered appearance.
Just knocked my knees out from under me. I couldn't believe what she looked like. My beautiful girl was just... She didn't even look like Tammy Wynette anymore. She looked all hollow and skinny and frail and vulnerable. She just looked like if you touched her real hard, she'd crumble apart.
Her constant illnesses forced Tammy to realize her time is short.
She always was prepared to die. She always was. That was something that she had been taught and had come to grips with early in her life. And so at any point, she was ready for God's plan for her.
The lesson is brought home when Upal Bird, the father of Tammy's 3 eldest daughters, dies suddenly in a car crash in 1996. Tammy calls all her children, as well as Richie's son and daughter, together that very night for a meeting.
My mom had signed a new will, and she told all 6 of us that she wanted us to meet with her and Richie and discuss what was in it.
Tammy tells them she has taken out 2 $1 million life insurance policies.
One was to go to Richie, it was for $1 million, and one was to be split between the 4 of us girls.
We, at that time, of course, we told her we really didn't want to hear about all those details, but she insisted that she wanted to tell us everything. So she continued to explain that the house and the business and everything else that Mom had, such as her awards and things like that, all of those things would be kept together, that Richie would own those until he passed away. And then at that time, everything that was left then would be divided between the 6 of us children, his 2 kids and the 4 of us girls. Richie only spoke up at the very end to explain that the will had been signed, it was filed, it was final, and that now that they had made us aware, that he wanted all of us to understand that the will could never be contested.
Tammy also tells the girls which of her personal possessions she wants to leave them, saying that she has written each name and item down on a yellow legal pad.
My mom almost, I would have to say, to a degree, was somewhat obsessed with that legal pad. I think it really worried her that one of us would feel left out somehow, or someone might feel like someone else got something more.
And then she also had this horrible feeling that the Richies were going to get all of her stuff, and her children weren't going to get anything. So she was going to fix it.
Tammy even starts writing their names on pieces of masking tape, sticking them to various items around the house.
Maybe there was an oriental rug, or there was a china set, or a fur coat, or something like that of that nature. She would take little pieces of tape and stick it to the item, write initials on there, and then for her, she would go back and write everything down on the pad so that she could keep things even as she added things new.
Less than 2 years later, Tammy Wynette dies inside her Tennessee mansion. But her death is not reported for several hours.
And I'll tell you what has infuriated me over the years is so much was said about, well, he didn't, pick up the phone and do this, he didn't do that. And I want to say to them, where's the owner manual when, okay, I've found my spouse dead on the couch, what are the steps I'm supposed to take now? You don't know what you would do when you find someone, your love, dead beside you.
Although he doesn't call 911, Richie does pick up the phone to call Tammy's personal physician, Dr. Wallace Marsh, in Philadelphia, and asks him to fly to Nashville. It's a decision that will later seem suspicious.
I think Richie just hid it from everybody until he thought he could get Dr. Marsh here so that Dr. Marsh could pronounce her dead.
When her daughter Jackie arrives on the scene hours later, she's surprised to find her mother's body still curled up on the couch.
I didn't want to look at her. I did not want my last memories of her to be like that. I did not look at her face. I just remember turning my face and touching her.
When Dr. Marsh finally arrives later that evening, he determines that Tammy has died from a blood clot in her lung. 3 days later, 1,500 people, including some of country music's greatest artists, gather for her funeral in Nashville.
When Tammy Wynette passed, the country community was really devastated. In fact, CNN covered her funeral live. It was the who's who of the country music community.
Afterwards, Gwen, Jackie, Tina, Georgette, and Tammy's stepchildren Kelly and Deirdre gather at a lawyer's office to hear the reading of Tammy's will. And they're about to get the shock of their lives.
They weren't just Tammy Wynette's riches. They were George Ritchie and Tammy Wynette's riches.
Country music legend Tammy Wynette has died suddenly at the age of 55. Her daughters Gwen, Jackie, Tina, and Georgette have gathered to hear the reading of their mother's will.
On the day of the reading of the will, my sisters and I and Deirdre and Kelly, Richie's 2 children, went together. Richie, which we felt odd at the time, stayed at home. He didn't come to the reading of the will.
The lawyer states that her husband Richie and his brother Carl have been appointed the trustees of the will and the estate.
As co-trustee, he had the power to distribute income, the money earned by the trust property, and principal, the actual assets of the trust.
The girls are not happy about this. They feel that someone from Tammy's family should have been appointed a co-executor.
My sister Tina just totally reacted defensively. She just kind of stood up and said, "This is crap." And, the rest of us, like I said, my sister Georgette and my sister Gwen, basically kind of just sat there in a daze.
Tammy's children listen as the will goes on to state that $10,000 has been left to each of the grandchildren, and that the house, all personal property, and control over her business assets are to go to Richie. No money is given to her children.
We went there to expect to hear exactly what Mom had told us, and it was not at all what Mom had told us.
At this point, Tammy's children still assume that they will be inheriting one of their mother's $1 million life insurance policies. After the meeting, they're asked to stop by Richie's house. He tells Tammy's daughters that they must sign an affidavit confirming the will's authenticity.
Richie said that we had to sign a form saying that we were agreed on the will, reminding us that if we contested, that then upon his death, none of us would inherit anything of Mom's.
Tammy's will contains a no contest clause stating that anyone challenging the contents of her will takes a risk of being disinherited.
The no contest clause in Tammy's will favored Richie. It forced the children to accept a will that they didn't think was fair to them.
All of us, with the exception of Tina, signed it.
They sign in good faith, believing that their true inheritance is yet to come. Richie then tells Gwen, Jackie, and Georgette that he will give them each $5,000. Tina receives nothing, while the other girls consider it an advance of what will eventually be theirs.
If we went ahead and signed the waiver, he would give us our first distribution of the money that Mom was going to leave to us. Not the full $250,000 apiece per child, but he would give us $5,000 now, simply because we had to wait until all of the tax assessment had been done, and then he would distribute the rest.
Still expecting to inherit $250,000 each, they are satisfied for the time being. But a bigger bombshell is about to drop. Despite being told otherwise by their mother before her death, they discover they were not, in fact, named as beneficiaries of either life insurance policy.
Tammy's will left everything to Richie. She left all her personal property to Richie. Then she left everything else, all the significant assets, the royalties, copyrights, and other life insurance, all the other assets, to Richie in trusts.
I don't know what happened to the insurance policies. That's the, $24 question. Other than, I'm assuming Richie received his portion, and then from what I understand, was the second life insurance policy went into the Virginia Richardson trust.
Gwen confronts Richie, wanting to know why they weren't named like their mother had promised. Richie claims that Tammy changed her mind.
Richie later told me that they had been told that they were going to get, a life insurance policy. But I know from my own experience, I've changed my own personal life insurance many times. So Tammy probably decided to change it.
The will states that the money can be used to provide for and support her husband. Any leftover money could be paid at Richie and his brother's discretion to the children.
It's not common when you have children from a prior marriage to give your spouse that much power and access to the trust money, because you are setting up a situation where that spouse is not going to want to spend money for his stepchildren.
Richie tells the girls that he will decide what money they get at a later time.
Richie had a lot of power over all the assets in those trusts. He was the trustee. He was the beneficiary as long as he lived. He had no obligation to give any assets to the daughters during his lifetime.
They weren't just Tammy Wynette's riches. They were George Richie and Tammy Wynette's riches. They built it together. George Richie was a wildly successful music executive. He was president of Capitol Records. You just couldn't get or find a better producer or writer or piano player. He was as equal to her. So to say that George Richie wanted Tammy's riches is a total insult, and you can see that that's not the way it really was.
To top it all off, the yellow legal pad, the list Tammy had painstakingly made detailing each daughter's intended possessions, goes missing.
Richie's explanation to no list being found was that, oh, honey, I don't know where that list is, and your mom changed it all the time. So there was no list filed with the will, so therefore we never received any items at all. Not our baby books, not anything that my grandmother left to our mom for us. Essentially everything that my mom had, clothes, personal items of all kinds, including things of ours, my sisters and I, none of those things were given to us.
I know that there's been a lot of question of where was this list of things that Tammy wanted to give out. And he told me that she wrote them out, not daily, but constantly. She'd get mad at this kid and it would, they would be scratched off. You get mad at this kid. I mean, she was constantly revising it.
For Tammy's daughters, the change in their mother's will is upsetting. But as they learn more details about her death, they soon have even bigger concerns.
Mom had been doing so much better. And we were just really shocked that it had happened then, and we couldn't figure out why. We had asked questions with family and of Richie and of the doctor that cared for my mom, but instead of getting answers, it seemed like we just had more and more questions. Something was not right, and we had to know what the answers were.
Did Tammy Wynette actually die from natural causes?
Dr. Marsh stated in my office, had Tammy Wynette been taken to the hospital the night before, she would be alive today.
Country music superstar Tammy Wynette has passed away at the age of 55. Suspicious about the events surrounding their mother's death, Tammy's daughters begin to question if it really was from natural causes. September 1998. Hoping to gain public support in their quest for the truth behind their mother's death, one of her 4 daughters, Jackie, airs her frustrations in a tabloid interview.
I contacted Star Magazine after Mom's death, particularly because I felt like we weren't getting anywhere. I wanted people to know what had happened. I wanted them to know what happened the night Mom died.
In the article, Jackie states that she and her sisters question the circumstances surrounding their mother's death and that they want an autopsy performed on the body. But not everyone believes Tammy's daughters' intentions are so honorable.
Well, I think you could see their credibility by the news outlet that they chose to bring their story to. I mean, the Star Magazine isn't the most honorable place that I would start if I really believed something had happened legitimately to my mother.
I don't think they're guilty of anything except being loving children that were devoted to their mother. And if there's one thing that Tammy wanted to do was to provide for her daughters. Nowhere do I see anything by Tammy saying, I want my daughter screwed out of my fortune.
And she had reasons to want to provide for her family. Tammy Wynette struggled with health issues for most of her life.
People told me stories of how she would come off stage just clutching her sides and collapse after giving her all to the audience because she was in such pain.
To deal with the pain, she begins taking prescription painkillers.
I know where it started. Tammy was in a lot of pain, so this doctor gave her some Demerol for the pain. The doctor said, I have called in a prescription, and there's like a drugstore that was over by a college here. I got it in the car and went over and got it. And that was her first shot out of the hospital. We were totally innocent. I mean, we didn't know. The doctor said, do it. We did it. And that was the very first one.
Tammy is given powerfully addictive painkillers like Demerol and Dilaudid.
She needed the drugs, there was no question about it, and the doctors prescribed them. I mean, she was in pain, bad pain, and she endured a lot. At the same time, there were plenty of times where she didn't need the drugs and she craved them. I mean, there's stories of Tammy jamming a pencil in her ear to get drugs, throwing herself down the steps to injure herself, or at least the appearance of an injury, to get drugs.
John Doe wrote Tammy's book. John Doe once said, the surprise is not that Tammy died. The surprise is that she lived.
After years of injecting drugs, the veins in Tammy's arms collapse. and she begins shooting the drugs between her toes, and later has a permanent catheter inserted into her back to allow a needle to directly shoot the drugs into her bloodstream.
Tammy was full of drugs, legal drugs, drugs that he had given her, drugs that Dr. Marsh had prescribed. A lot of Versed, and Versed is a hypnotic, and even before the needle is finished depressing, you'll be out. You wouldn't be able to give yourself a shot of Versed. It would be very unusual if you were able to.
I can't even, as a nurse, give that medication on my own. But yet, Richie was giving this to my mom in her IV at home.
I didn't actually realize that Mom had even any kind of a drug issue until I was married. She covered it up so well, but that's what addicts do, I guess.
Some of Tammy's friends and family say her addiction is fueled by her controlling husband. But others paint Richie as a caring husband, someone who would do anything to help if you were sick.
There's nobody that you would have wanted on your team more than George Ritchie when you were sick or when you were down. He was at his very best. He was a love at that. He was better at that than anything.
Being an addict is starting to hurt Tammy's reputation, and the topic of rehab is brought up with her friend Janine Nichols Smith.
Tammy and I were in this hotel across the hall from each other. We could open our doors and talk to each other. And our doors were open, and she said, "Jan, come over here. I want to have a serious talk with you." And I said, "Okay." So I go over and pop in bed with her, and I'm like, "What's up?" She said, "Do people in Nashville think I'm a drug addict?" And there had been a little bip in the newspaper about she was high on something besides country sunshine. And I said, "Yes, Tammy, they do." And she said, "We need to fix it." And I said, "Yes, we do need to fix it." I thought, oh my God, here it is. Here's the chance. And I had it, man, we were ready. We were ready to go. We were ready to go to rehab.
Ed Yarborough, Tammy's daughter's lawyer, says the family tried to help.
There was an attempt, at least once, maybe more than once, for the family to intervene and see if she could be weaned off of the powerful painkillers. Mr. Ritchie was not totally cooperative with that.
Tammy enters the Betty Ford Center, but after a 3-week stay, she collapses from a life-threatening bowel obstruction and undergoes a surgery to remove a quarter of her stomach. It's not long before Tammy is back on the painkillers.
Tammy's daughters tried to stand by their mother. They tried to help her. But you gotta understand, Tammy was hard-headed. She didn't want the help. I mean, it has to be said. She had many shots at having people help her get off drugs. In the end, she didn't decide to do it.
Her daughters believe drugs were the real reason for their mother's death, but with millions at stake, who stands to gain from covering it up? They formally request an autopsy to be performed on their mother's body, but it gets dismissed by the medical examiner.
The Tennessee law has always given the attending physician or the family physician quite a bit of latitude in terms of filling out a death certificate and deciding whether an autopsy is necessary. In this instance, Dr. Levy, who was the medical examiner for Nashville at the time, he stated that he was satisfied with the explanation the doctor gave and saw no need for further investigation.
I think Richie didn't want an autopsy performed because he knew that they would find something in Mom's system. He was very smart in that respect.
George Ritchie was never asked the questions. The questions came when he found out about it on the news, just like you and I. They pointed their questions, to the tabloids. So he didn't know that there were questions. He didn't know they wanted an autopsy. I mean, it all came as a surprise to him.
Determined to have an autopsy performed, Tammy's daughters look for new ways to keep the pressure on.
We had hired a private investigator who had found a lot of information for us. Richie never called 911 after he found Mom. It wasn't until many hours later when the family attorney arrived that he called 911 many hours later. The investigators showed up. They, in fact, and the coroner asked for a full listing of Mom's medications. And both the doctor, via telephone on the airplane, verified Mom's medications, and Richie verified Mom's medications. Both of them left off the fact that she had been prescribed and been given regularly IV Dilaudid, IV Versed, and IV Phenergan. Having denied those medications, the coroner felt no need, looking at the other medications, to do a full autopsy. Richie, in fact, when asked if he wanted one just for the peace of mind of knowing what actually happened, he refused autopsy, and in fact very quickly wanted Mom's remains to be prepared and ready for funerals.
Equipped with this information, on April 5, 1999, one day before the first anniversary of their mother's death, the girls file a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit against Richie and Tammy's personal physician, Dr. Wallace Marsh.
We hired Ed Yarborough, basically begged him to, listen to us and just let us know if he felt like there was anything, that we could do. He looked at the paperwork we gave him. He looked at everything and felt like we had something.
Dr. Marsh flies into Ed Yarborough's office from Pennsylvania with 2 lawyers to fight off the wrongful death lawsuit.
They came, I believe, to try to talk us out of filing the lawsuit. So we spent about 2 hours or so one evening in my conference room, primarily listening to the doctor and his lawyers give us all the reasons why he was not responsible for the death of Tammy Wynette.
Instead, Dr. Marsh ends up giving Ed Yarborough more ammunition than he had to start with.
What they actually did was provide a lot of evidence against the doctor, because it was then pretty much admitted that he was sending Dilaudid and Versed to Tennessee by way of airplane. And it was also admitted that he had not been present when her symptoms had become worse the night before. Mr. Richie and Dr. Marsh talked, and Dr. Marsh had suggested that she might need to go to the hospital. That opened up the possibility that the failure of Mr. Richie to follow the doctor's advice, if indeed that was the advice, might have been a causative factor in her death. The issue here is that when Dr. Marsh stated in my office that had Tammy Wynette been taken to the hospital the night before, she would be alive today. That was a statement that was new information to us and probably to Mr. Richie as well.
Richie finally agrees to an autopsy, but after a year, the results come back inconclusive.
There was actually 2 different conclusions. The coroner said that it was unknown, because one of the results from a lab came back saying that there was Versed and Phenergan in her system, and then other tissue samples that were taken showed that there was nothing in her system.
You can't get drug levels and things like that months after the death. So the autopsy resulted in a cause of death of cardiac arrhythmia. Basically, her heart stopped. And that's not a very specific finding. It's kind of a catch-all for situations where you can't be sure what caused the death.
The daughters drop Richie from the lawsuit and agree to resolve the case with Dr. Marsh for an undisclosed amount.
From a legal standpoint, we felt he had to be dropped from the lawsuit at that point, because there was no longer any basis for saying that his failure to take her to the hospital was a cause of her death.
I believe George Richie got very poor legal counsel in that suit. Instead of standing up going, wait a minute, you can't sue me for this. I didn't do anything. Come back. Stand up for yourself. I was just furious with him for it.
It would never have brought Mom back, obviously. I would certainly much rather have Mom here than whatever we got from the wrongful death suit. But it was our way of saying, having people listen to us and letting people know that we're not crazy after all.
Meanwhile, Richie marries Sheila Slaughter, a TV producer, 30 years his junior in 2001. Tammy's daughters are less than thrilled with the union.
I don't think it was me personally. I think that anybody that would have been in my position, they wouldn't have liked.
For the most part, the couple stay out of the public eye for the next 9 years. But then Richie's health starts to decline.
Richie suffered for many years with COPD, with emphysema, which is certainly not a disorder that is pleasant by any means. He certainly did not have a peaceful, easy way out of this world.
When George Ritchie dies on July 31, 2010, Tammy's daughters feel certain that they'll finally inherit the money and personal items they feel entitled to. But little do they know that the biggest shocks are yet to come.
When Tammy Wynette's daughters sued George Ritchie for $50 million and basically called me an accomplice, that's pretty much a game changer.
When Tammy Wynette's fifth husband dies, her daughters expect to finally inherit what they feel they deserve.
When Richie passed away, I thought, okay, now maybe things will be okay. Maybe we all can get back to normalcy and life will be okay.
My sisters and I expected that upon the passing of our stepfather, that both his two children and the four of us would then inherit the rest of Mom's belongings and what was her name, her likeness, image, everything that was related to her business. All of those things then would be divided between the six of us.
But what Tammy's daughters don't know is that Richie ran up expensive hospital bills while he was sick, and he used Tammy's estate to help pay for the treatments.
Apparently, there is a clause that says if for some reason if he lives much longer and he becomes very ill at some point in his old age where he's unable to care for himself medically and unable to care for himself financially, then it would be acceptable for him to sell off things if he needed to in order to pay for his medical care.
They didn't see George Ritchie for 12 years, so they had no idea the life that he was living, how difficult his life was, his health problems. You know, they never came to see him one time in a hospital. He had many, many bills to pay and, you know, medical expenses, so they would have no knowledge of that.
He was the beneficiary as long as he lived. He could take all the income from those assets. He could take any principal from those trusts, as long as he had a need for his health, his education, his maintenance and support. The words on the page of the will still stand, but they only say if there are any assets in the trust at Richie's death, then those assets go in equal shares to Tammy's 4 kids and Richie's 2 children. There were no assets to pass at that time.
While there's no money left in the trust, the girls are still hopeful to regain control over their mother's song catalog and her business, until they discover that that too is gone.
Then we found out that Richie, prior to his death, had sold off everything about 5 months before he passed away. They sold everything for $2+ million. Mom's full catalog, everything she'd ever written, everything she'd ever done, her name, likeness, image, all of her business assets, everything that was left that he hadn't already spent was then sold.
We were screwed when Mom died, and then we found out we were basically screwed when Richie had died. So it was a double whammy.
Tammy's daughters also learned that before Richie's death, he donated many of Tammy's personal items to the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Those items were not Tammy's girls' items, they were George Ritchie's, and he did not want them to end up on eBay. She was a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame, the highest honor that any artist could have. So why not have her things in a elegant, beautiful, honorable situation that where she could be safe? And Richie he really wanted to try to make things right.
Tammy's daughters tell a different version of what happened, though the Country Music Hall of Fame won't confirm either side of the tale.
After the 1-year exhibit at the Country Music Hall of Fame, everything was then going to be shipped back to Sheila, so we were able to stop that. It's still being held in the warehouse there at the Country Music Hall of Fame, which I would much rather it be there than in her hands. At some point, we are hoping that those things then will come back to the 6 of us.
In George Ritchie's will, neither Tammy's daughters nor the 2 children he had prior to his marriage to Sheila are left anything.
So he felt in his heart that he had done all that he was responsible to do for those children. He was disappointed in his career. He didn't have the amount of money that he had expected to have. When Tammy Wynette's daughters sued George Ritchie for $50 million and basically called me an accomplice and ruined his name and his career. That's pretty much a game changer. I don't think you could have expected that man to wrap up a beautiful will and leave what was left of his life with a pretty bow on it and say, "Here, girls, thank you for the nice life that you allowed me to have."
A year after Ritchie's death, his daughter, Deirdre Hale, an attorney, asks Tammy's daughters for permission to change the name on Tammy's tomb. Deirdre says it will help in any future legal challenges the daughters may make against George Ritchie's estate.
She explained to us that for legal reasons, she felt it important to change Mom's name to her legal name, which we assumed she meant her maiden name, which would be Virginia Wynette Pugh. She explained to us it would be a temporary measure. Once this was over, then we would be able to change Mom's name back.
Instead, the tomb reads Virginia Richardson, her legal name when she was married to George Ritchie.
Why she would do something like that is beyond imagination, be against everything that Tammy would have wanted and that I know for a fact George Ritchie wanted.
The name change fails to help Tammy's daughters in any way. Instead, it seems to keep her another step further from her daughters.
Tammy Wynette loved being Tammy Wynette. She's not even Tammy Wynette. They even took that away from her. She must be turning in her grave.
Many people are still trying to understand why she did not name her children as the beneficiaries on her life insurance policy.
Tammy should have left that $1 million policy originally payable to her children. That way they would have got that $1 million straight up at her death and without Ritchie being able to take it from them.
I know damn good and well, when she signed that will, she thought it was a contract. I'd swear my hand on the Bible she did not read that will. She didn't know what was in that will. It was 35 pages long.
I think it's important that people know that Tammy loved her children very much and her grandchildren and wanted to see that they had a legacy from their grandmother. We all knew what Tammy's plans were for the children in her will. And she was very excited that she thought she had worked this out. I don't think she would have ever signed that if she had understood what she was signing.
Still, there are others who hold Tammy accountable for her actions.
She used to talk about it in interviews. I want to make sure my daughters are taken care of. Well, at the end of the day, it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And Tammy has to bear some responsibility in that because she was an adult. She could have done other things. Everybody blames Ritchie, you know? And there's a lot to blame Ritchie for, you know? You could fill 10 volumes. But you got to look at Tammy, too. She just wanted somebody to make the world go away. And Ritchie did what she wanted. He made the world go away. And you have to hold Tammy responsible for her life.
We can't go inside that room where Tammy met with her attorney when she wrote that will. It's clear from reading the will that at that time, she was more in love with Ritchie than she was her children. Or she was more concerned with Ritchie's financial security over the rest of his lifetime than she was with the financial security of her children.
I know, without question, Tammy's first priority was George Ritchie, and George Ritchie's first priority was Tammy Wynette. That's how it was. I saw Tammy. I watched her with Ritchie. I know how protective she was over him. Her will was carried out to the letter, how she would have wanted it after what her children did to her after she died. And I'm a very compassionate person. They've never reached out to me in kind. If they had, they would have gotten a very different response.
Tammy's daughters insist that all they are really looking for is their mother's wishes to be respected.
We didn't want anything from Mom. All we wanted was what Mom wanted. We just wanted her last wishes to be honored and to find out what really happened to her so that she could rest in peace.
While Tammy Wynette was not able to leave a part of her legacy to her children, she lives on through her music.
Tammy Wynette truly changed the face of country music. There have been many female artists, famous female artists, who have covered some of Tammy's songs, but nobody can sing like Tammy Wynette. Nobody has a voice. No one can match Tammy's vocals. No one can match Tammy's style. Many have tried. Many have done justice to what Tammy's done, but nobody will ever take her place.